The book is Tales of a Real American Liberal, and the author is John Sheirer. He is joining us. John, I got a chance to look at a lot of this book before it was published, and then, of course, I got a much better look at it after. And it's interesting because you talk about the idea of a real liberal, and in talking in the book about, and the essays where you talk about your upbringing and your background, it's funny because it really is, a lot of it is what I think would lead a lot of people to assume you would end up being kind of a traditional religious conservative in many ways. And you kind of brilliantly point out in the book that that idea has been co-opted by Republicans, very astutely in many ways, for the purposes of winning elections. But there's no rules that say that a kind of traditional upbringing like the one you had means you can't be progressive politically, right?
Absolutely. I think that's probably the biggest message of the book. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and it's the kind of part of the country that Sarah Palin would call the real America.
Right.
If you remember back in 2008 when she gave that speech talking about how it was great to be in these little parts of the real America. Man, the hair on the back of my neck stood up when she said that, because I grew up in central Pennsylvania, which is often called Pennsyltucky, or as James Carville said, there's Pennsylvania's Pittsburgh on one end, Philadelphia on the other end, and Alabama in the middle. It does have a reputation for being, in a sense, conservative, but it's sort of the old-style American conservative. You know, I'm 50 years old, so when I was growing up, most of the adults were what you would call Eisenhower Republicans. And Eisenhower Republicans these days would be labeled by Sarah Palin as socialists, because they want to do things like build highways and champion Social Security. So while it does seem to have a reputation for being conservative, and there certainly are a lot of Republicans, they don't automatically blend into today's Republicans, who are so off the scale extreme, the elected Republicans, that they don't represent the everyday rank and file kind of Republicans who I grew up around.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a two-tiered deception in a sense. I mean, on one hand, there's this idea that Republicans now, or neoconservatives and the kind of religious right, are in any way representative of what used to be Republicans. And then there's also the idea that those that hold anything close to what were traditional conservative values wouldn't want to vote for Democrats today. So there's really two different disconnects. And I mean, a good example you talk about in the book is this one of personal responsibility, right? Which is a term that has been heavily co-opted by Republicans, and we're not even really talking about personal responsibility anymore when that term is brought up politically, are we?
Oh, I agree. It's not really personal responsibility what people are talking about today, because personal responsibility, I think, also implies a community responsibility. That's how I was raised, that not only do you look out for yourself, but you also look out for the people around you. And the people around you can be the people in the next house, the people in the next town, the people in the next state, people who are all part of your nation. And that sense of responsibility has really been just changed so much by today's Republican Party. That sort of Ayn Randian sense that I'm going to get mine and I don't care what happens to anybody else. That's not personal responsibility. That's not live and let live. You know, what the kind of personal responsibility I'm thinking of that I was raised with, that's a liberal sense of personal responsibility, includes that community responsibility. And instead of live and let live, it's live and help other people, live and connect with the world around you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, many people would argue that we have a personal responsibility to make sure that everybody has some basic level of subsistence, but that's certainly not what modern Republicans would subscribe to. It's funny you mentioned Ayn Rand. I was actually just today, because of the passing of Mike Wallace, watching some of that great interview that he did. I don't remember what year it was with her, and it's really fascinating, actually. The other thing also that you talk about in the book is this kind of connotation that has very successfully been attached, this kind of stigma to the term liberal, right? And I think that in the last 2 years, there's been some success in pushing back against that, but particularly during the Bush presidency, it was literally a dirty word. I mean, not even liberals wanted to be associated with the term.
Oh, yeah. I think that dates back even to the Nixon days, when they really started, the right wing of the Republican Party really started co-opting that term and turning it into a dirty word. And it really has come into power in recent years where, you know, I'll be in a discussion with people and I'll try to make some salient points about whatever issue we're talking about, and they'll just say, oh, you're only saying that because you're a liberal, and then they'll sort of smirk at me as if that automatically wins the argument.
Right.
It's become such a derogatory term for a lot of people that they just don't know what it means. And liberal has a lot of different meanings. If you look it up in the dictionary, one definition is a generous person. You're being liberal with your time or being liberal with your assets. And that's certainly not a bad thing. Liberal doesn't mean, the dirty word connotation of liberal is someone who just wants to raise everybody's taxes and give everything to lazy people who don't want to work, and attack successful people. That's not at all what being a liberal is. And 99% of everything you hear on Fox News about what a liberal is just absolute fiction. It doesn't exist. There are no
question
people
about that,
in the world.
And the other thing too is this stereotype. You talked about Sarah Palin talking about real America and the heartland. I'm actually curious. It's very clear that people not in those parts of the country geographically feel excluded by that type of rhetoric. But I'm curious how you think those that live geographically within those so-called heartland or conservative areas, but don't subscribe to that political philosophy. I mean, my assumption is they feel particularly marginalized.
In a sense, they do, yeah. I think there are a lot of people who might still identify themselves as conservatives, might still identify themselves as Republicans living in those parts of the country. But then when they hear the specific things that are advocated by elected conservatives, elected Republicans, and conservatives in the media, Republicans in the media, they're totally turned off by that. The recent things with Rush Limbaugh, for instance, and this whole contraceptive debate, particularly most of the women I know from those areas of the country and around where I grew up, they think that's just crazy. They know that it's a settled issue from 40 and 50 years ago, and they don't want to be dragged backward like that. I think the problem comes that sometimes they think that that's sort of the exception, that what the Republican Party stands for overall is good because they still blend it in with the Eisenhower Republican kind of viewpoint that has been handed down through the generations in rural central Pennsylvania. But that's not what the Republican Party these days represents. It's something totally different. And they just kind of make assumptions that the things their Republican leaders say and the things they hear in the Republican media like Fox News represent their point of view, and they once they look at the particulars of the issue, they recognize the dissonance. But when they get the dishonest point of view from Fox News and those kinds of sources, I think they feel a lot of frustration.
No question about it. We've been speaking about the book Tales of a Real American Liberal and with the author John Sheirer. A really great book, John, and a pleasure to speak with you about it today.
Thank you, David. It's great to speak with you.